/ every breath was agony. His throat was parched, each inhale a raw scrape of pain, and his heartbeat pounded so hard it felt like it might shake his body apart. Seth's eyes darted in every direction, wild with desperation. He searched frantically, but no matter where he looked, there was nowhere to disappear to. The Duke's residence in the capital, like the castle in the south, would have a secret passage reserved for the head of the family. But Seth didn't know where it was. The family's secrets were kept in the library, locked away and accessible only through the head seal. All because of Smith. They had been born with the same face, the same build, the same bearing. Because Seth had been born a single minute later, he had lost everything he had ever wanted. His parents' love. The loyalty of the household's retainers. The position of head of the family itself. He shoved down the hatred swelling inside him and ran into the garden behind the Duke's residence. In the end, the place he chose was a small cave deep among the hedges, one he had known since childhood. Seth crawled inside, curled his body into the familiar tight shape of his younger self, and dragged a bush across the entrance to conceal it. His mind felt clouded, thick as fog. Find him. Find the imposter. Search everywhere. The fake is still on the grounds. The knight's sharp voices rang out from all directions. If they found him, he was dead. Seth shuddered, consumed by despair, and pressed his hands over his ears. He opened his eyes and bit his fingers, an old habit, one he'd had since childhood whenever the anxiety became unbearable. Blood welled up across his knuckles. He didn't notice. Time passed. He couldn't tell how much. Gradually, the shouts and the sound of armored footsteps grew more distant. A fragile new hope surfaced. The wild hammering of his heart began to slow. Seth stared into the dim space ahead of him, breathing steadily, his thoughts sharpening. The moment he made that resolution, a familiar voice broke the silence. Seth. Goosebumps rose across his skin. He turned his stiff neck and looked toward the cave entrance. The bushes had been pushed aside. Dark navy hair. Sharp eyes. Red lips. A face identical to his own peered in at him. You. It brings back memories. I used to come here whenever we visited the capital with our parents. You were always terrible at hide and seek. I knew this was the last place you'd run to. Smith's voice was slow, almost nostalgic, as if he were simply remembering something long past. Seth's jaw tightened. His fingers found the dagger hidden at his ankle. The moment he saw Smith's face, something cold and focused settled over him. All he had to do was drive the blade into that exposed throat. I never imagined you would come at me like this, Seth said, deliberately drawing out his words as he edged forward, inch by careful inch. This is quite a surprise. I learned from you, Seth. Smith tilted his head with a quiet smile. I've changed. And I have you to thank for that. Don't I, Seth? Smith's navy blue eyes held his steadily. Seth coiled every muscle and drove the dagger forward. Something flew from somewhere and knocked the blade from his grip. He lunged for it as it hit the ground, and a rough hand seized him by the back of the neck and hauled him bodily out of the cave. Let go of me. Let go. Seth twisted and thrashed until the grip released. He staggered upright, blinking in the sudden blaze of sunlight, and looked at the man who had been holding him. It was the commander of the Southern Knights. One arm hung at his side at an odd angle, cut through, Seth realized distantly. Ha! The commander looked down at him without warmth. Hiding like a rat for years. Still waiting for your moment? Smith stepped forward, studying Seth with an expression that held no triumph, only something tired and worn. No, Smith said quietly. I was prepared to hide for the rest of my life. You didn't have to touch Brianna. Seth raked a hand through his disheveled hair, his blue eyes sharp with contempt. You did all of this just because I took that woman? Who helped you? Seth demanded. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. I had you isolated, I removed every ally you had. So who on earth helped you? He had to know. If he was going to reclaim his position as head of the family, he would need to root out whatever remained of Smith's support. The Duke of the West, Smith said, his voice even. Seth's eyes went wide. What? The Duke of the West had been this man's ally? Then you call yourself Duke of the South? Seth's voice rose. You accepted help from the West? Do you have any idea what the West is after in the South, what they've been quietly working toward? Seth was still grinding his teeth when a new figure approached. A heavy-set man with a thick beard, the Commander-General of the Southern Knights. Seth flinched and looked away. This was the one man he had never been able to fool. No matter how perfectly he had imitated Smith, this man had never been deceived. That was precisely why Seth had sent him to the furthest posting he could find. And now here he was. All of your followers have been apprehended, the Commander-General reported. Good. Well done. Smith nodded. The Commander-General looked at Seth with cold, flat eyes, then stepped back. Seth closed his eyes. Seth. Smith crouched and picked up the dagger from the ground. He turned and placed it at Seth's feet. Seth slowly opened his eyes and looked down at it. You want me to take my own life? Yes. I don't want to kill you with my own hands. So the choice is yours. You call it a choice, but there's only one answer. Seth smiled crookedly. He reached down and picked up the dagger. I hated you, he said quietly. I hated that you had everything, and that you went about it all as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You had the same things I did. You simply didn't understand their value. Did I? Seth's eyes glittered with cold hatred. Then give me the position of head of the family. Smith met that gaze with steady, calm eyes. They were twins. They had been given the same things from birth. But Seth had always been consumed by wanting what was his brother's, and even when he seized something by force, he lost interest almost immediately. What satisfied him was not the thing itself, but the taking of it from Smith. Even after assuming the title of Duke of the South, it had been as though the position was never enough. He had spent those years trying, with everything he had, to erase the man he had taken it from. I think I've given you enough time, Smith said, his voice firm. At those words, Seth's shoulders trembled. Fear and despair moved across his face, naked, undisguised. I'm your younger brother. His voice cracked. Please. Save me. It was the first time Seth had ever called him brother. The first time he had ever begged. Smith was quiet for a moment. Goodbye, Seth. He turned and walked away. Seth let his head fall, hunching over as if broken, as if he might weep. Then, slowly, he looked up. There was a crooked smile on his face. The knights' positions, he had already mapped them. They were far enough away. Goodbye to you, too. Seth tightened both hands around the dagger and lunged at Smith's unguarded back. But the commander moved first, as expected, swift, practiced, and intercepted. A line of red bloomed at Seth's throat. Smith turned around slowly. His face was bitter. He had known. He had known Seth would do exactly this, and he had turned his back deliberately, and waited. Seth stared at Smith with wide, bewildered eyes, as if he had been wronged, as if this was somehow an injustice. Seth died without being able to close his eyes.